My name is Martin Zlámal and I'm from Czech Republic. Today I would like to show you how I'm translating my React applications using FBT framework. FBT was created by Facebook and is being used by Facebook to translate their large applications into many languages easily. I decided to jump straight into the demo so I can show you as much as possible in the code to give you as much value as I can. So let's go to my editor. Here I have just a simple React component. There is nothing complicated about it. And we are going to be working here with one sentence, which I'm going to translate. And this sentence is going to be visible here in Storybook, so you can see how it's being changed. Our demo sentence is: Peter submitted his proposal for this conference. I'm going to translate it via FBT, and not only that, I would like to show you additional features of FBT. For example, how do I change name of the submitter from Peter to Jane? And since Peter, let's say, is a male, Jane is a female, how does it affect the grammar of the sentence? Next, I would like to show you how we work with plurals in FBT, meaning when Peter wants to submit one proposal or he wants to submit two proposals, the same for Jane. And lastly, we are going to look at how to work with different kind of variables in the sentence. For example, in our case, how to change this conference to simple generic event. I prepared some variables here at the beginning of the component so we can use them later. And now let's get to work. Here's our sentence. Peter submitted his proposal for this conference. Now the way it works in FBT is that you take these strings you want to translate and you wrap them into FBT tag. This tag, what it does is marks these strings for extraction and later for translation. I will show you how does it look. So you write FBT. Here's our string. And interesting part about FBT is that it always requires a description. And this is very important for the translators so that they understand the context of the sentence. Because once we run extraction of these strings from our React application, not only is it going to extract our string, Peter submitted his proposal for this conference, but it's also going to extract the description with it. In our case, it could be something like example sentence for React Conf Brazil. Now, when I look into the storybook, you can see that nothing changed. And that's a very nice feature of FBT, that it works no matter what. It's very similar to how you would write your normal React applications. For example, what I can do is I can use normal text, normal HTML tags here. So this is going to make the submitted bold. As you can see, it works without any issues. Now, in order to submit this string for translations, I need to extract it from the React application. To do this, I'm going to run one command, which is like a wrapper around multiple commands behind the scenes. I will tell you just in a nutshell, what does it do? Basically, FBT goes through your code base. It tries to find these FBT tags. It remembers where they are. And once it finds them, it collects all these strings into a file. I call it like a source strings JSON file. And you can use this file to send it to translators or to some program, like for example, Crowdin can work with FBT so that the translators can translate it. I will show you how this source file looks like. In our case, is this one. It is like a large JSON file. And here you can see this part is our extracted sentence. Here I can see Peter submitted his proposal for this conference. And here is a hash of this sentence, which is being used later for a finalization of these translations. There's additional information which is not that important for us at this moment. We should focus basically only on this part. So now we have one sentence extracted and translators can translate it. That's great. One thing I would like to show you as well is how to work with FBT in a functional way. So here I'm using sort of a React component, but you could also use it, you could also write it a bit differently. And that is that you would use just a FBT function. The first parameter would be our sentence, and second would be the actual description so that the translators know what does it mean. So when I comment this and look into the storybook, you will see that it still works. This is useful when you are working, say, outside of React, or you need to implement some more complicated logic and the React components are not so convenient. It's up to you what you choose, but generally you are most likely going to be using this style. Okay, so now when you understand the basics, let's have a look at something more complicated. Specifically at the beginning, I mentioned that I would like to be able to change the name. So it can be that Peter submitted his proposal, but also Jane submitted her proposal. Normally in React, you would take this variable, author name, and use it like so. However, in FBT, you have to mark this variable using FBT param tags, so that once the FBT starts extracting these strings, it understands the meaning of this variable. It understands that it's a parameter and how it should be used. This is how it looks like. Use FBT param. Here is your variable. So two properties which are required are children, which is our author name, and also name of the variable. So let's say author name. You can choose whatever you want here. I will show you where it's being reflected later. So now when I look into Storybook, the sentence didn't change as expected. When I change the author name to Jane, we are going to see that Jane submitted his proposal for this conference. Now here I would like to mention that this grammar of the English sentence is incorrect. Here should be Jane submitted her proposal for this conference. However, we are going to fix this later, don't worry. Now, let's run the extraction of these strings again. Once this script finishes, we look into the source strings JSON, which is here. And as you can see, it didn't change much. Here's still our sentence. The only difference is that now here is this author name variable. And this helps the translator to understand that this part of the sentence is not supposed to be translated. It is a variable. And they can relocate the variable to a different position depending on the final language. So that was a FBT param, useful for any kind of parameters. However, when it comes to names, there is a FBT name. This is better to use it when you really have a name. That's why it's called like this. And one major difference between these two components is that FBT param requires only name of the parameter, so it can be extracted correctly. However, FBT name also requires a gender of the name. So let's put it there, gender and author gender. So let's return back Peter, and Peter is a male. Now, when I go back to the storybook, you can see the sentence still works. So let's extract it. Once it finishes, we can check our JSON with source strings. It's here. You can see that it looks identically from this one sentence perspective. The only difference is here in the metadata, which I don't want to go very deeply into, but basically the difference is that the translators now understand that the variable has a gender, it is a name. And in many grammars, like for example in my native language, Czech language, the sentence changes based on the gender of the person we are talking about. So once it's Peter, the sentence is different. Once it's Jane, the translation would be different again. However, when I change it to Jane, you can see that the sentence is still broken. And this is because even though I explained that the Jane is a female and the sentence should be different based on the gender, it's up to the translators to understand this, and it's up to the translators to provide me the correct variants of the sentence. But I can help them a lot. What you can do in FBT is you can take this pronoun, in English it's called pronoun, this his, her, their, and you can mark it as a pronoun. Specifically, you would use FBT pronoun tag, which doesn't have any children, but one of the required properties is type of the pronoun. In our case, his, her is a possessive pronoun in English. So that's a possessive pronoun. And another requirement for the pronoun is gender, for similar reasons, so that you know how to change the final sentence based on the gender. Now here it's worth mentioning that the gender of the pronoun and gender of the name is using different constants. Be careful about this. But now let's return back Peter. Peter is a male. And let's have a look at how does it look like in Storybook. So Peter submitted his proposal for this conference. Nothing changed. Now Jane. Jane is a female. The pronoun is a female singular. And now you see that the sentence is grammatically correct in English. Jane submitted her proposal for this conference. Let's extract this sentence so you see what's happening behind the scenes. And now it's going to be more interesting. When it finishes, we check the source strings. And now you can see that FBT actually extracted 3 sentences. The way how it works is that FBT understands what's going on inside the FBT tag. It understands that I said, hey, this is a pronoun. And it knows that in English there are multiple pronouns. There is a pronoun for female, there is a pronoun for male, and there for, let's say, multiple people, or for unknown person, unknown gender. And this is very useful in reality because FBT prepared all the sentences which needs to be translated, and we don't have to rely on translators to tell us that something is missing. The FBT suggests that we need these 3 translations because the application might require them. Okay, so that was a pronoun. In FBT, I would just like to mention that in FBT, you have 4 kinds of plural. Basically all I'm showing here is in the documentation, so you can dive deeply into what other kinds of pronouns you can use and in what situations. But now, let's have a look at how does it work with plurals in FBT. So at the beginning, I mentioned that Peter submitted his proposal, one proposal, but we would also like to be able to change this sentence so that Peter can submit 2 proposals or 5 proposals, 10 proposals. In order to do this, we need to take the singular word of proposal, because that's the one that is going to be changing in the sentence. And we are going to use FBT plural. Now, FBT plural has required children. Children of this component is like a singular form of this word. In our case, it's still plural. And what I like to specify, even though by default it is not required, is to specify also the plural version of the proposal. So in our case, it would be proposals. And required property of this component is count. Okay. So count in our case is number of proposals. So how many proposals do we have? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 5? And finally, my favorite property is also show count. Show count is what happens with the number of proposals. So if many means that when we have 0 proposals, there is going to be just proposal. But once we have more than 2, 3, 4, it's also going to display the actual number of proposals. We are going to see this in a minute. And I believe that's it. So let's have a look in our storybook again. As you can see, our sentence didn't change. Jane submitted her proposal for this conference. But let's change the number of proposals to, let's say, 2. You can see that the sentence changed to Jane submitted her 2 proposals for this conference. Or 5. Jane submitted her 5 proposals for this conference. And finally, we have to extract this sentence. So let's run our script which is extracting. And once it finishes, let's have a look at the extracted strings. Here, you can see that we have much more combinations now. We have still 2 sentences for a female version, 2 sentences for a male pronoun in the sentence, and other 2 sentences for unknown gender. But each of these versions is also having 1 variant for 2 proposals or multiple proposals, and 1 variant for 1 proposal. And the same applies for male author, 1 proposal, multiple proposals, and unknown author. So again, you can see that we are giving the final sentences to our translators so that they know that they have to take plurality into account. Of course, in reality, it's a bit more complicated because, for example, in my native language, in Czech language, when you are translating plural sentences, for example, this first one, that Jane submitted her 2 proposals for this conference, we actually have multiple styles of plural, and it depends on the number of proposals. So if you would have 2 to 4 proposals, the translation would be different. And if there would be 5 up to infinity proposals, the translation would be again different. Even though it's plural, it's still plural. This is where my language differs from English. And translators, of course, know this. So what they do is they take the sentence and they return back multiple variants of this sentence based on the number of proposals. Now, very cool part about FBT is that it actually understands grammar of every language in the world because there is a large database of these grammars. And it knows which variant of the translation to choose based on this information. So, in other words, translators are not translating just these 6 sentences. In reality, they are going to translate much more sentences, but FBT knows which one to choose because it has the rules embedded in it. All right, and now the last part of our modification is how to deal with this last word, with this conference. Because sometimes I want to use conference and sometimes I would like to use event. For this purpose, we can use enum. Specifically, there is an FBT enum tag. This is how it looks like. Now, FBT enum doesn't have any React children, so let's leave it like this. But what it has, there are 2 required properties. One is enum range. And now, enum range can be either object, when you have more complicated enums, specifically you have different combination of keys and values, or in our case, we can just use an array of simple scalar values. So in our case, it would be conference or event. Those are the 2 values of the enum which can happen. And of course, we have to have a property which is going to choose the enum we need. So let's say conference. In fact, I have a variable here, so let's use it so we can change it easily. Let's have a look into the storybook again. You can see nothing changed as expected. Jane submitted her 5 proposals for this conference. But I can change this variable to event, and we have Jane submitted her 5 proposals for this event. So let's play a little bit around with this sentence. Peter is a male. He submitted, let's say, 1 proposal to this event. You can see it's going to be reflected correctly. Peter submitted his proposal for this event. Of course, it's up to me to keep the grammar sane. So for example, if I say that Peter is a male, then I'm going to get the male version of the sentence. If gender of Peter is female, it's going to still work correctly. So Peter submitted her proposal for this event. And in case that gender of a Peter is not female, then it's up to the programmer to make sure that it's correct. Okay, so that was a basic example where I showed you that you have to use one FBT tag which serves for extraction of the string, and then you can use various other FBT tags inside as a children of the FBT tag, which helps FBT to understand what this sentence is about, and it can extract many combinations. In fact, I didn't show you this last one, so let's extract this event and conference example. When it finishes, we look at the source strings again, and you can see that there is much more combinations. FBT once again understood that we are talking about 3 versions of a pronoun. So for example, here is for her, here is for his pronoun. It understands that there is multiple plurals, and it understands that we are sometimes talking about conference and we are sometimes talking about event. In this case, the enum is not a variable, it's one of the options. So FBT is offering you all these options, and therefore translators can take this option and can translate it without forgetting it. So you can be sure that your application is well translated. This was a simplified example, and I would like to conclude it here. But of course, in reality, there is a bit more things. All what I showed you is available in documentation, and I will publish this example as well, so you can check out and you can play around with it. All this is in the component available. Now, what I didn't mention are additional advanced features of FBT, like for example, you can share your enum values around the whole application. You can use it in multiple components. There is a way how to do it, so you don't have to repeat yourself. The same is for common strings. For example, in Facebook, you can imagine that there is going to be a word like in many places, and it would not make sense to translate it over and over again. So there is a way how to specify so-called common strings, so you can translate them just once and reuse them everywhere in the application. And there are additional runtimes utils which you can use to create well-localized applications. Some disadvantages of FBT, it's nice to mention. One disadvantage is that there are not so many tools that would help you to translate these strings. One tool I'm using is a Crowdin, which works well for simpler FBT cases, but sometimes it's broken for more complex cases. Of course, it's a good thing to report it and improve it. And related to this, one disadvantage is that the user base, number of users using FBT is relatively small. So I would like to encourage you to try FBT and to create the user base a bit larger, to make the user base larger. And I think that's pretty much it from my side. I would like to thank you for paying me attention. And I would like to invite you to my GitHub profile where you can see this example, or you can get in touch with me if you want to discuss any details about what I said or something was not very clear. I will be very happy to answer you. And also please consider sponsoring me to help me doing these talks for you in the future. Thank you very much and have a nice day.